So if we get a common denominator here, we would just multiply 1 minus sign and 1 plus sign. What happens when we multiply 1 minus sign and 1 plus sign? What do we get?
It cancels.
No, we get 1, the first one squared minus the second one squared. And then for our numerators, yes, you're going to multiply this side times the 1 plus sign. So we have 1 plus sign times 1, right? And then we add to it the 1 times the 1 minus sign. Right? On the top here, you have 1 and 1, so that's going to give you a 2. Sign minus sign, those cancel. 1 minus sine squared. What is 1 minus sine squared? It's similar to our Pythagorean identity, which is sine squared plus cosine squared equals 1. So 1 minus sine squared is going to equal cosine squared. All right. So this is just going to be cosine squared. All right. Which if you were to write it like this, 2 times 1 over cosine squared. What is 1 over cosine? That is secant. So we have 2 times secant squared, which is what we wanted. I changed it to x, apparently. There. I didn't like the theta for a little thing. All right. Number 21, we have sine squared, tangent squared equals tangent squared minus sine squared. I don't know that one is any simpler than the other, so I think you're really going to have to either simplify one. I mean, I don't know that one's any simpler than the other, I guess is what I'm saying. So take one side and try to simplify it, really. So if you take this right-hand side, the subtraction, that might be easier than a sine tangent. Because, I mean, it might be more difficult because you're going to, if you put that in sine and cosine, you're going to have some fractions there. So we can just take the right-hand side and try to simplify it to look like the left. So if I were to rewrite tangent as sine and cosine, how does it look? Yeah, sine over cosine. So I have sine squared over cosine squared minus sine squared. I need to get what if I need to add these guys? Common denominator. What is my common denominator? Cosine squared. So I have sine squared. That doesn't change because it's already part of the common denominator. But I got to multiply this guy by cosine squared, right? So sine squared minus sine squared cosine squared all over cosine squared. All right. Now, that numerator, what can I do with the numerator here? Yeah, I can factor out a sine squared. So I'm going to factor that out here, and I'll be left with 1 minus cosine squared. Which is what? Which is sine squared. So 1 minus cosine squared is sine squared. So I can say sine squared times sine squared over cosine squared. All right. Pay attention to this. Sine squared over cosine squared, which is what? Tangent squared. So I have sine squared, not with the highlighter. Sine squared, not over, times tangent squared, which is what I was trying to get. When I believe the left-hand side is going to be the more complicated one here versus the right-hand side. So I'm going to deal with the left-hand side. All right. And for something like the left-hand side, I'm going to put it in all sine and cosine. So if I rewrite secant, what is secant if I rewrite that? Yeah, it's 1 over cosine. So I have 1 over cosine minus cosine, right? I need a common denominator here. What is my common denominator? So I got to multiply this by cosine, right? So I have 1 minus cosine squared over cosine, right? What is 1 minus cosine squared? Sine squared over cosine. I can split that up into sine over cosine times just sine. Sine over cosine is tangent.
Bro, that's not that good, bro.
Madison.